Morning. Good morning, Pastor Trent.
What up, Kayla?
Happy Friday.
Woo woo.
Thanks for joining in and listening to Hope for the Soul. So, as you all know,
Joke time.
So one Sunday morning, a pastor was traveling to his church, very country church, traveling through a blizzard. He has 5 minutes to spare when he gets to his church, and he goes in, enough time to turn on some heaters, turn the lights on. No one is there. 5 minutes till church starts. And so
That's about right.
So he starts going to the back of the building, and he's starting to turn lights back off. Well, in comes Farmer Joe. And he said, "Hey, Joe," he said, I guess the blizzard has everybody, stuck. He said, "So it looks like we're just not going to be having church today." And he said, "Well, Pastor," he said, "when I go out to feed my cows and only one cow shows up, I still feed them. I don't just not feed him because just one cow shows up." Pastor's like, "Oh man, Joe, you're right. All right, let's go in the sanctuary." And so Pastor's getting his thoughts together, and he's just really encouraged by Joe's faith that he preaches 2 hours.
Poor Joe.
2 hours. So after the message, Pastor says, "Well, Joe, did you enjoy today's word?" He said, "Well, now, Pastor, when I go out and feed my cows and only one cow shows up, I don't feed him the whole bell."
Oh, that's a good joke. That might be your best one yet.
One caught. That's great.
Oh, that's funny.
That's why I fell to my knees laughing before the podcast started.
Yeah, that's a good one. That was a Douglas Hicks joke.
Yes,
right
it was.
That made me think of him. All right, everybody, welcome. So today's going to be a fun episode because we've just been talking and we've got several ideas. So we don't know where we're going on this episode, but we know it's going to be
Y'all
good.
are along for the ride.
Yeah, so we've had several conversations this morning, but also spanning over a few weeks.
But before we go into our conversations of the morning, can we take like 30 seconds and talk about our experience yesterday?
Cool, do it.
We were invited into a room of leaders, political leaders and business leaders, and we were just amazed. There was political leaders, there was current political leaders, past political leaders, there were CEOs from Fortune 500s. There was a table full of students, and there were two Pentecostal preachers.
And the vice president.
And we were definitely the different
Former vice president.
The vice president.
And we were definitely the odd ones out there, but the whole experience of their positivity.
That was cool.
And their outlook for the future, that I don't think they probably communicated in some ways that they were not real happy with current things in our country.
Policies,
but they were exuberant about the coming months, the coming years, and where business is going to go, where energy is going to go, and where America is going. And I couldn't help but be affected by being in the room with these leaders with their extreme optimism.
Yeah, I thought it was really cool that they listed the reality of where they're at in their businesses. And first off, they weren't representing their companies; they were there as individuals. And there was men who lead major companies who are competitors, but they came together because they share common values. And there's a lot of scriptures quoted. I thought that was really cool. But they're there because they believe in the American dream. They believe in helping other people. And they see, even with maybe some inflation and some skepticism in the market, they see opportunity. And I thought it was really, really neat. And it's definitely a day that I'll never forget.
And maybe one of the most impressive things, and this might well bridge into what you want to talk about, was these leaders, their extreme interest in everyone in the room. and they wanted to make sure that they learned who you were and what you did. And they were very, very interested in the students. They were interested in other people in the room. And that was like they wanted to be in your world and wanted you to be a part of theirs. And even though what we do, I know one person that I met, he was telling me what he manufactures. And when he said, what do you do? Well, I'm not manufacturing, and I'm not in the energy sector, and I'm not a politician. I'm not any of those. And it just dawned on me. He says, well, I build people. And so that launched us into a nice conversation about one of the most, the most valuable commodity in the American marketplace, in the church, or anywhere, and that's the people.
It was cool.
Ideas were floating.
It was cool listening to them talk behind closed doors. Like if they were going to be evil, like a lot of people think that industry is, and corrupt and, greedy, that was the room for them to express their true colors. And because there was no cameras, or there was a couple cameras, but it was, probably with the vice president, with his staff and his team that was with him. But that was a safe place for them. And in the safe place for them, they were quoting scriptures, and they were concerned not only for their employees, not only for America, but they were concerned with global poverty and how they can make a difference in places that have no electricity. And it was really, really cool. One of them, one guy, I don't want to list his name or his company because I don't know if I should do that, but he's in his mid-40s. He's the American president for a global company, one of the largest oil and gas exploration companies in the world. And he's 43, and I was standing beside him or around him in line trying to meet Vice President Pence. And I just said, hey, how are you where you're at this young? Because he was one of the youngest men that spoke from the stage. And obviously it was an open panel and everybody spoke, which is really cool. But he's the youngest man, and the vice president was very impressed with him and referenced him several times.
Very differential.
Yeah. And so I said, how'd you get where you're at? He said, well, I never said no. Whenever his company needed a new president in the country of Venezuela, people above him who were more qualified said no because they didn't want to move their family to Venezuela, a third world country. And he said, yes, I'll do it. And then with all the challenges of operating a major company in a communist or socialistic country like Venezuela, he found great success there and led that team to be an industry leader. And so then his company said, hey, we want to move you to North Africa. And he said they tried to offer that to other people, but other people wouldn't go and move their families to North Africa because of terrorism and a lot of other threats there. And he said, yes, absolutely, I'll do it. And so he told me what most people thought would kill their careers actually launched my career. And now in his mid-40s, he's leading one of the largest companies in the oil and gas sector in the world, all because he said yes. So always say yes.
There's power in yes.
Power in yes. Yeah, it was super cool day. All right, moving on. So we've been talking about some cool things. I don't know if they're cool things. I'm interested by these topics. Relevant things. We've talked about celebrity culture in the church in the last few days. We've talked about cancel culture. We've talked about a lot of things, and Alex and Kayla have some pretty good thoughts. So the guys are going to be quiet and let the girls preach to us. Let the girls podcast to us.
First off, last evening.
Never mind. No, we're not going to be quiet.
Last evening, young Pastress Kayla led off our Wednesday service with some incredible thoughts. And I think
preach to us, Pastor Kayla. Give us your high five.
Talk to us again. Sure, okay. It was so good. We'll take leftovers, honey.
Leftovers. Okay, so I talked about David. God chose David to be his servant and prepared him for that calling. He called him to lead a nation. Alex, I'm going to tell you, since you weren't in here, you were with youth.
Preach to Alex.
Yeah.
Alex needs this, man.
So God called David to lead a nation, but David had never led anything but sheep. So I think as far as, we know that David is a man after God's own heart. And with leading sheep, there's no room for being prideful or arrogant. And I think that was David's launching pad. That is obviously where he had the servant's heart. That's where it grew, was right there. But, okay, later on in his life, David was not a perfect man. In fact, if he was leading us, I think we probably all would want to cancel David as far as the things he went through, was wanting to be with another man's wife, having that man killed. And the definition of a dysfunctional family, David had it. But through all of that, all of his problems, all of his woes, he still turned to God. He confessed every sin, each and everything. Obviously, God held him accountable, and he, felt that and knew that. But God still used him.
That's a good word, Pastor Kayla. Keep sharing.
Yeah, sorry, my phone.
I don't like that word called accountability.
So
Yeah.
it has a negative a connotation. What's that word I'm looking for? Is that the right word? It has a negative tone to it, but God held David accountable, and through accountability, he became a man after God's own heart. So, we think accountability suppresses us, but accountability actually elevates us.
It empowers us.
Submission is a very powerful thing. Anyway, Pastor Kayla, we're preaching your sermon. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. So my favorite author is Mark Batterson. David, in my opinion, just leading sheep, didn't have the qualifications to lead a nation. Mark Batterson has a saying in The Circle Maker that God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called. He called David. Even when David became king, he still prayed to God, whether he was celebrating victories or confessing his own faults. And we see all of that in the Psalms that David wrote. But no matter what he went through, he still turned to God. And it was this kind of relationship with God and David that made him a man after God's own heart. And just like David, God is, you want me to finish it?
Finish out. Give us your altar call right here.
Just like David, God is working in all of our lives, shaping us into his servant. All of our hardships, all of our failures, it's just shaping us and molding us to who he wants us to be.
That's a really good word. And I'm proud of you, babe. You're a good preacher, which everybody knows you're a good preacher because everybody knows you write my sermons. But
Oh, my word.
Alex,
No,
talk to
I
us.
don't.
So Alex has some really cool thoughts. And so this is kind of where we know what we're talking about, but there's not like a seamless flow, which I think is cool for the podcast because people just want real.
So Alex
and
asked us a
honest.
question earlier, and it turned into a conversation because she was wondering
Into the night.
this whole concept of accountability. Who, what, where, when, and how are our accountability factors? So ask us that question again and see if we can sound as good now as we did 30 minutes ago.
So I was asking the question with like creatives in the church and stuff. They have a lot of influence, especially with social media. And we see it all the time. They have a moral failure, make a mistake, and we see churches or their affiliates pretty much not cancel them, but a step away from them and cut ties. So I was asking the question of like, what keeps you accountable as a person of influence? Like, is it your own personal convictions, your own personal morals, or is it that fear of being canceled? Is it that because of the influence you have, especially in the day of social media?
Yeah. So I think the obvious answer for all of us is we have to allow ourselves to be held accountable to God's standard for our life. What is God's standard for our life? It's found in His Word. So we must align our life up and measure it according to every principle of His Word. So there's that as individuals. And then obviously in Christian popular culture, I guess celebrity culture, if that's good or bad, I don't know. That's probably just a natural thing. But last few weeks in the world, in the world of Christian music, there's been some separation between individual artists and groups that they've been associated with. And we've asked the question, like, are they doing that? And I don't want to ask this in judgment. It's just like just a honest question. Like, so it makes me wonder, is that group distancing themselves from that artist because they don't want to hinder ticket sales at a tour or album sales or Grammy nomination or Dove Awards or anything like that? Or are they doing it for the right reasons? And then you have to question, okay, is the statement that the individual is making, is that truly repentant, or is he trying to salvage a career, you know? Mm-hmm. And it's wrong of us to say one way or the other. We have to leave it in God's hands. Mm-hmm. But I think as leaders and individuals, all of us have some form of influence over people, and everyone listening today has influence, whether it's 1,000 or 12,000 or 20,000 followers on social, or if it's 3 kids or a family of 4 that a man leads, or a team at work. We all have to have integrity when it comes to accountability. Like we can have a good face, and we can say the right things, but you can say the right things and have a wrong spirit, you know? And I think it's very, very important that, number one, we have to be careful to not elevate people higher than we elevate God, because we can't carry the glory. Like mankind was not, that's why you like take it away from Christian artists, like popular artists, like whether it be movie stars or singers or, you know, television actors or television, you know, news anchors or whoever. Like if people get so big, they eventually explode. And it's because mankind wasn't meant to carry that much pressure and glory and appreciation from people. Like, we will explode. So as people of influence, we have to recognize that people might want to follow us. People might want our influence and our opinion, or we might be entertaining, or, you know, for whatever reason, people want to follow you or go to a concert or go to your church, or, you know, or go hear a preacher preach, you know, because it's, let's be real, there's a celebrity preacher culture, you know, and so we have to keep our integrity in line to where people might be drawn to us, but we can't let that we can't allow that to affect our integrity. Otherwise, there will be some major issues.
Well, this is really no new issue, because Satan, if we're talking celebrities, and so when we think of celebrities, we're thinking leaders involved with the arts, involved with I think you use the word creative. So Satan was the worship pastor in heaven, and he began to become elevated in himself, which caused for a separation from him and God. So I think that there has to be, if someone chooses a path of sin, you have to be honest with yourself and with them, and there are strong scriptural principles that says we shouldn't be unequally yoked with people that are. It's one thing to make a failure and repent, like David did. It's another thing to have a life, or your life be a culture of continual sin.
Yeah.
For instance, it's one thing to maybe commit adultery one time. I'm not endorsing that, as opposed to maybe living a life of hidden perversion that becomes exposed for many, many years.
Right.
So I think, though, we have to, from several viewpoints, we have to decide if we feel the need to distance ourselves from someone. We have to honestly look at ourselves and assess why. because it's nearly impossible. It's nearly impossible to really understand the motives of other people, because it's easy for us to say, well, they always do that. They're always this way. And we judge their motives. And we have to be honest with our own motives. Why do we choose to separate from maybe something that's had a huge moral failure? And like someone said, the music group here, are we doing it because it's politically correct and politically convenient? Are we doing it because there is a strong ethic or a good Christian word, an old-timey Christian word, a strong conviction that we don't cross certain lines?
Mm-hmm.
And I think within the ministry, there are some very hard lines. And if you're in ministry and you cross certain moral lines, it's not a matter of people have necessarily set you aside or canceled you. Sometimes we cancel ourselves with our decisions. But at the same time, we've got to be honest with ourselves and assess, why do we feel the need to distance ourselves from certain situations? And sadly, I think every one of us has probably failed, because we may well have separated ourselves from someone for the wrong purpose. And it may be that our friend group says, hey, they're not a part of this anymore. They're not a part of us anymore. And so rather than being loyal to maybe a relationship with that person who is being ostracized, we will become loyal to a friend group whom might not be quite as pure as their honor shame type thing attitude portrays them to be. So I think we have to check motives,
Mm-hmm.
which is near impossible.
Mm-hmm.
We can only judge our own motives.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Right. Yeah.
And then coupling with what you said a moment ago, Trent, sometimes Paul said that we should be very careful with elevating young people in going into ministry, because those are leadership type roles. As a matter of fact,
He said, "Lest a novice be lifted up," or what's that verse? Is that what you're referring to?
that's where I'm headed
Yeah.
to. But the age of the ministry, the age of the priesthood, was 30 years old. And in the Old Testament priesthood, before they become a priest who was fully functioning, operating minister, they would have years of service, years of training, and at 30 years of age, they would step into ministry, because it takes a certain amount of time to have a certain amount of maturity.
Yeah.
And if you look at ministers today that seem to have success before they're 30, it's a very fragile success.
Yeah. So, but here's the tension, though, because this is the flip side of this. So the Levitical priesthood was 30, but when Jesus was finding his disciples, they were in their early 20s and late teens. So I think from the Jewish law, yes, 30 was the age of ministry. 30 was the age, I guess, where accountability and maturity begins to step in. But also, I think that God can use anybody and everybody. So it's not just a hard age number, even though I think that naturally people start respecting you once you get into your 30s.
No, it's not a hard age. It is a level of maturity.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's what I was trying to get to. It's a spiritual issue.
And
not
so
an
many
age issue.
times, how many times have we seen this in pop culture, where a young person becomes a star, and they go from being a 16 or 17-year-old kid or a teenager, and then they're elevated to superstardom because of a song or because of a success. And they go from being a normal, nothing stands out about them, they're just another kid at the high school, to suddenly they're elevated with millions of dollars, cameras, lights, popularity, and fame, and there are no restraints on their life. And then how many of these young people that are now multimillionaires at 18 or 19, 20 years of age, and they can't sustain
Yeah.
because they don't have the maturity level to handle with wisdom the ability to have millions of dollars available. And who's going to say no to the cash cow? I mean, who's going to say no to someone who is going to release another song 90 days from now that is going to also produce another series of millions and millions of dollars? You don't say no to that person. So if there's no accountability, then young people in this case, they can't handle that success. And sadly, many times, that is in celebrities, but it happens in regular life too.
It's a people issue.
Because many times people are elevated in service, or they're elevated in life, or they're elevated in ministry because they've got a great talent level. And many times our talents propel us past where our maturities can sustain us.
Hey, y'all just mentioned two things individually. Okay, so you brought up the Levitical priesthood, and you said the age was 30. And, okay, so obviously that had to have been basically a lifetime of, that those people saw in front of their eyes. And then you brought up Jesus and the disciples. So obviously he knew he didn't have much time. And so it was a training process. I'm sure every day they were younger, but they still denied him.
Yeah. Well, I think.
I mean, as far as like the age difference, and I mean, he had a shorter time as far as influencing them.
I think some of that could be age. It could be personality. For instance, Peter cut off a guard's ear. Peter was a hothead. But some of that could have been the intense pressure of culture in the moment, because face it, the Jewish culture was fighting against what Jesus came to not abolish the law, but to fulfill the law.
Yeah.
And so there was much confusion. And there is still in the Jewish culture, that's why there's Messianic Jews, and then there's other form of Judaism. How do you say that?
Well, I think you still see the Pharisees and Sadducees,
Mm-hmm.
and there are those that are what we see, and we relate mentally because we see this picture of a Hasidic Jew that is very careful with all the laws. They're very careful, and they dress accordingly, and they do all these things. And then there are probably the Sadducee, which is probably more what we would call today a modern type, a practicing Jew. I mean, a secular, that's the word I'm looking for, a secular Jew, which is they're of the faith and they're of the family, but they don't practice. Well, they're more liberal with their lifestyle, etc. Mm-hmm. And so in those days, you had the Pharisee who was extremely careful with all the rules, and then you had the other side, which were more secular people that were part of it from a secular standpoint. And so you had the wide variance in who and what they were. But still remember, at that age of maturity, Jesus entered his priesthood there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at 30.
And so I never want to be guilty of trying to suppress someone that's younger that God begins to use. However, I do have the life experience, and all of these years here, we have had many, many young ministers come through and preach a great revival, a great few weeks of revival, or a great weekend, and they were finding great success and were being used and being elevated in great places. Only a year, 2 years, 5 years later, to see them not even involved in ministry. Yeah. Because again, talent was elevating them beyond what their maturity can handle. Yeah. And Paul said it, not being a novice, but another translation says, these people do not need to be new believers. Yeah. It takes a certain amount of time.
Discipleship.
To gain a discipleship, maturity, training, and you got to weather some storms. I mean, the old timer said, corn in the crib. You got to prove yourself.
Yeah. Alex, you've been taking notes. You've been taking notes.
Yes, I wrote a few thoughts down. I asked a question. I said, what influence has social media had on the culture of the church? And do you think that it's affected the mercy that we show? 30 years ago, a moral failure wouldn't have been blasted
on the news.
Yeah, and it's not
Or
right, but things
social
could be more
media.
hidden.
Yeah.
And the recovery and the restoration from that is a lot easier, I think, than when it's, I mean,
Blasted.
it's, you make a mistake, someone, especially like someone that has influence, it's seen, it's posted, and it's no longer rumors anymore. It's for sure
Yeah.
this was seen. There's pictures, there's evidence, it's on social media. So how has the church, like, how has social media affected that in like the restoration of people?
I think there's positive takeaways from that and negative. Just like 30 years ago, there was positives because people could make mistakes, say something that probably shouldn't have been said, and it not be put on church milk or, somewhere funny. And so that's a good thing. But the flip side is it was easier to cover
Yeah.
and sweep things under the rug then.
Yeah.
So I don't think that social media, it's been bad because of woke culture, and it's easy for all of us to buy into the cancel culture, and everybody now has a platform to make their statement and all that, and I don't think that's right. I think sometimes the best statement to make is no statement, and I haven't been perfect with that. Like,
Yeah.
that's something that I'm learning. But if there's something major going on, I might have an opinion, but just because I have an opinion doesn't mean I need to go to Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. And I felt,
post your every thought.
yeah, like I failed that test bigly. I failed that in the past, and so now, like, I try to be careful with that.
Yeah.
So what was your original question? How social media has affected?
The culture of the church, and how do we think that that's affected the mercy that we should?
Yeah, so I think there's always been those who don't want to extend mercy, and there's always been those who maybe, I don't think you can extend too much mercy, but there was people who tried to speed up the process of restoration.
Or you feel guarded with the mercy that you want to show.
Yeah. So I think that social media, I don't know, it's hard to say because we are I was listening to a podcast, Tord and Brittany Wells, they just launched a podcast together. It was really cool. And he mentioned that we are the first generation of Christians
Saw that.
on social media. And like, I never, like, that's not a revelatory statement, but I never thought about that. Like, the church has never been like, we are paving the way, good or bad. Like, we're living in the biggest communication shift in not just our lifetime, but in human history. We're living in the middle of. And so what we do now and how we respond right now as a church and as individuals is shaping culture moving forward. And so I think I want to extend mercy.
Yeah.
Like, there might be some big failures, I mentioned our friends Tord and Brittany. So I mentioned at the beginning, I was referencing the Maverick City deal, and we can all have our opinions on that, and there's nothing wrong with us having our opinions. And they did what they felt was right, and hopefully they made the right decision. But sometimes there's failures in our friend group. Let's take it out of the music industry, the Christian music industry. Let's bring it to our friend groups.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's failure in our friend groups. And if you wouldn't make a big public statement about something in our friend group
Or your family.
Yeah. Why would you make it about
Right.
someone else? Because they might not be your blood family, but we're the family of God.
Yeah.
And I'm preaching to me right now. Like, I'm not casting stones at anybody. I'm saying that this is something that we all have to get better with. We've been given a lot of mercy and grace in our life.
Well, the question being the social media aspect of this, I think that social media has been very good because, and we're talking accountabilities, social media, because everybody has a phone in their pocket or their purse, and anything starts happening. Our culture is shifted. If a red light is flashing, everybody that can see that has their phone out, and they're filming that. And so there probably were in times past, maybe police would do something, and there would be no accountability because they could get by with it because nobody saw it. There was no proof. But now there's always a camera out. This is good.
It brings transparency.
It brings transparency.
Accountability.
It is a cultural accountability that is there. That is good. But anything that is good can also be bad. And then it can go too far. And then we can take that same tool that might help accountability, but then we also have the ability, every one of us has the ability to exploit someone that we might have got a picture of them while they were doing it.
Yeah.
It's like taking that concept of the glass house to a whole nother level.
Yes.
Absolutely. And so I think there again, we have to, this type of behavior has to go all the way back to, the archaic values of the golden rule. I mean, how do we want to be treated? And how would Jesus do this? And then if Jesus wouldn't exploit, then should we exploit?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that goes back to Kayla's thought about David. Like, I don't know, like, imagine if David's moral transgressions happened in the Instagram culture. Like, would he ever find restoration? Oh, God would restore him.
Oh, God forgives.
Like,
the blood of Jesus Christ
like
covers the sin.
there's nothing changed. But how, like the mob is real. Like the social media mob, like that's dangerous. That's dangerous. And sometimes it can be done with pure intent. Like, I got to make a statement against this. I've got to make a statement for righteousness. And I preach that. I believe that. I've made statements of righteousness here recently at the school board. But I think we have to be very careful that in our statement stand of righteousness, we not have a mob mentality, because you can say the right thing and make the right stand, but have a terrible spirit. And sometimes we can say the right thing and make a good statement that everybody that's godly and everybody with the right moral compass would agree with. But are we doing it just to hurt somebody who we might be threatened by?
So you're referencing maybe like a passive-aggressive prayer request.
I'm just
or a
mentioning
passive-aggressive statement.
I'm just mentioning an ungodly spirit. Like,
Yeah.
like the whole, like, you mentioned friend groups and social pressure. Like, the friend of my enemy has to be my enemy, or the enemy of my friend. There's all these different variations. Like, whatever
they
happened.
Don't like you, so I can't like you.
Mm-hmm.
My friends don't like you, and so if I still want to be in the cool group, then I can't like the people I want to be accepted by. I can't like you, because if I like you, they're not going to like me, and that's all insecurity like that. Like, we have to get that out of our system, because that's toxic, and that's going to hurt a whole lot more than just you. That's going to hurt that'll hurt your children. That'll hurt. I mean, that can become generational, and before long, your kids will have bitterness towards a group of people or an ideology, and not even know why.
Right.
Well, you reap what you sow.
Yeah.
And if you're reaping what you're sowing, and you're choosing to put a great big X on someone, then when you participate in that, it is going to show up next generation.
Yeah.
And so if your kids are around your attitude in that environment, when they start doing the same thing, but remember, whatsoever you sow, that shall you reap. You sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind.
Mm-hmm.
That which is done in secret will be proclaimed on the rooftop. And so there are scriptural principle that says you need to be very careful how you choose to conduct your affairs, your decisions concerning yourself, your family, and even others, because your day's coming.
That's good.
And it also says, in the measure that you meet mercy,
It's going to be.
it'll be handed to you. And so if we're going to make a mistake, let's let the mistake fall on the mercy side of the line and not the mean side of the line, because there's going to come a day when we're going to need a lot of mercy. And if we've meted out meanness, when our day comes, we're going to inherit meanness. But it's going to be more than we ever passed out. So if we are careful to show kindness, love, fruit of the Spirit, mercy, do all of those things when we are dealing with these relationships and circumstances, when our day comes, it is highly likely, if we've shown mercy, we're going to be given mercy. But we have to also understand, if you always show mercy, and you're given mercy, there's going to be somebody with a cell phone that's going to say, see, they got by again. they're getting by with it, but no, they're reaping the mercy that they've shown for a long time.
Yeah.
But even when the goodness is done, there's going to always be someone, and the haters are going to hate.
Dad just said haters. Clip this.
The critics are going to
make it a reel.
The critics, I mean, literally, I kind of think that being a critic, one who critiques things professionally, I wouldn't want that job, because it's hard enough to go through life just avoiding that whole attitude of being critical of everything you see. Mm-hmm. So imagine it being your job to critique everything. How do you separate that in real life?
Right.
And so if it's your job to critique everything, and then you're with your family, and somebody says something, and you start to ponder that, and you critique it, and then what does that really mean, and what is their motive, and then you have a whole nother conundrum that is opened up. I don't want to be known as the critic.
What else do you have, Sister Shirley? That's one question. You got a whole lot of notes over there.
Oh, I just have notes on David, because I didn't say it earlier, but that's like my favorite. That's my favorite person in the Bible. Mm-hmm. So I love to do studies on worship and imitating him. So we were having
I was thinking about this, but in my mind, or sometimes I think that if we've had all these faults and we've had all these failures and we have made it right with God, and everything you think is, oh, well, it's all perfect. God's forgiven him and it's all perfect. But the Bible says that after David went through everything that he went through and he made things right with God, it doesn't mean that everything was just hunky-dory. No, it says that his house was not peaceful until he died. Mm. So God was still working on him. That's something that we wouldn't see. We wouldn't see that behind closed doors, David's home is just a mess. It's a wreck. Mm-hmm. No, it was not peaceful until, obviously he died.
And to take it a step further, David found forgiveness with God. He found mercy. He knew how to humble himself and walk to the presence of God. Mm-hmm. But his greatest desire was to build the house for God.
Yep.
And he lost that privilege.
Yeah.
Our bad decisions, many times when we choose those decisions, we are forfeiting the greatest desire in our life. And it's not what God did. Mm-hmm. It's not what the church did. Mm-hmm. It's what we did. Yeah. Because by this decision, we forfeit the best things we could have had. And in David's case, he wanted to build this beautiful temple. Mm-hmm. Solomon built it. Mm-hmm. But David literally forfeited that because God said the prophet told him, he says, there's too much blood. So sometimes there's just too much.
Yeah. And
some of that stuff that falls in that category of too much, we find mercy, we find grace, yeah. But we do have to deal with the consequence.
Right.
That is a reality. And then I think when we get to this point of having to deal with the consequence, let God handle the consequences.
Yes.
I don't want to participate in that process of being the one who helps bring judgment to someone.
I don't want to have a noose in my hand when God shows up to distribute mercy.
Yeah.
I don't want to have an axe in my hand when he's showing up with mercy.
Yeah.
Because he'll extend mercy to the one who really did wrong. And I'm just trying to play God. I'm trying to do God's work for him, and he'll have to cast some correction on me. Mm-hmm. That's very dangerous. This is some deep stuff.
Yeah.
But I think going back to social media, we have to recognize that you said it best. What's done in secret will be revealed on the rooftop. So this comes back to our integrity. We have to be people of integrity. We all have a brand, and going back to Maverick City, are they protecting the brand, or are they really making a good decision? I think they're making a good decision. They might be protecting the brand. Who knows? That's for them. But regardless, we can't make in our own individual lives. We might not have a big brand like Maverick City, but we do have integrity.
So roll it back,
and we have to live with integrity, not protecting a brand, not protecting sales, not protecting church attendance or membership, protecting we're going to meet Jesus face to face.
Right.
So then we have to be candid. You're using the word integrity. So any organization, you've used a music group, but any people group,
Yeah.
when they find themselves at a crossroads, do I choose this or this, or do I just choose the lesser of two evils? What am I doing here? You have to then decide, what is this people group built upon? And so in this case, you're talking a music group. If they're built on Christian principles, if they're built on integrity, if that is the cornerstones of that group, then in reality, you very well understand what their decision was to separate themselves. However, if we've built on other things, if we've built on, you mentioned branding, if we're building on our brand, if we're building on our popularity, if we're trying to protect those things, are we being true to our public image? Are we being true to our integrity? What's our core issue here?
That's good.
And if you build on the rock, you'll stand.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've built on one of these things that is not as stable, that is more shallow, and I think that our public image and our politics and all of those things are much less stable than building on integrity, principle, honesty, morality. And when you build on that, that will stand the course of the storms.
Yeah.
And so when you see something big crumble, more than likely, it was built on wrong stuff.
Several years ago, guys, it's probably been 14, not long after we got married, there was a man who wrote a song. Beautiful song. In fact, we just sang it this past Sunday. But he wrote the song based on himself, and it was a lie. It come out in the news. He'd written this song and said that the song come forth that he had cancer, and went through the whole story. Well, come to find out, I don't remember how the news broke out or whatever, but it was a lie. He never had cancer.
I think that's the deal. Kind of like social media called up to him. That was the very beginning days.
Yeah.
I don't think Instagram was a thing yet when all that happened. But people, you can only tell the same story so many places, and it catch up to you. If it's not true, especially with social being the way that it is. And so I think just people got real curious and started pressing. Yeah,
I don't remember how it happened, but it came out that he did not have cancer, and basically this was a lie. And this was on, I saw it on Facebook, and you go and read those posts for the comments, but it struck a chord with me because I thought, oh man, I loved this song. I still love it. But at first, I wanted to cancel the guy because I thought,
can't sing this song anymore. Yeah.
Dude, you just took so many people, their lives of what they went through. And it's almost like you made a mockery of it. It's what's going through my mind. I told him, I said, I'm not singing that song again. And he was like, hold up. No. God can use anybody. If the man, God dealt with it, I know. But God can use anybody. He can talk through anyone. And I had to learn that the hard way. At first, I wanted to completely cancel, but that's not the right thing for me to do. God will use a donkey. And so, if, another thing, if we won't praise him, he'll use a rock. And so no matter what, I'm not going to be that person that throws those rocks.
If God will use a rock, we shouldn't use that same rock to destroy somebody else.
But you've just described someone who's chosen to be untruthful. They learned how to manipulate the crowd. They knew he could take a sad story and turn it into a hit.
Yeah.
By pushing the right buttons and manipulating. Be careful around people whom seem to know what buttons to always push
That's
Yeah.
good.
to get what they want.
Yeah.
Because people that push buttons to get what they want, in later life, that you're going to find them pushing the same buttons to keep what they want. And so here's a little rule in life. Whatever you do to get where you are, you're going to have to do that and more to stay where you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're elevated because of goodness and talent, and you're elevated because of purity and integrity, this way you stay there is to maintain the goodness and maintain the integrity. But if you're elevated from manipulations, if you're elevated from untruthfulness, if you're elevated for wrong reasons, you're not going to get up there then suddenly discover a whole suitcase that you forgot you packed of integrity. I never knew I had all this integrity. No,
Right.
no, you got there, and so the only way you're going to stay on top is the same thing that you've always used. Sadly, if you've used integrity, that's solid stuff. If you've used the right fruit of the Spirit, that's solid stuff. But if you've built with wrong material, it's like that beautiful image that was made of Nebuchadnezzar. It had clay feet.
Yeah.
And as beautiful as this thing was built, it couldn't sustain the pressures when the attack came and it toppled.
Mm-hmm.
So I think our lives must reflect when we're the one that's visible. We have to reflect those good things, the fruit of the Spirit and the integrity. But also when we're the one that's observing, and we're faced with the moment of decision as to whether or not we're going to forgive, we're going to offer love, or where are we going to fall?
Whose side are you going to choose?
And if you have friends that are saying, well, you got to pick me or them, you've got wrong friend.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Exactly.
It's a wrong friend.
Yep.
We've had this conversation with several of our friends, whether it be that, unfortunately they face divorce, or there's been ministry changes or lifestyle changes or even doctrinal differences. And as sad as some of that stuff is, we've just had to make the decision that we're going to keep being people's friends, and we're going to love everybody, and I'm not going to pick a side.
Yeah.
I'm not going to pick a side.
No, you can't pick sides.
If there's a marriage splitting up and it's in our friend group, and that's happened before, we're friends with everybody still. You've got your issues. We're not on team husband. We're not on team wife. We're on team. We love everybody. And we've had that with doctrine. And I know, we've caught a lot of flack with this because of some of our friends who might not believe like we do, or might make decisions that a lot of people aren't comfortable with. And I've ridden in cars. We talked about this last week. I've ridden in cars with some of my friends. Their names have been brought up and dragged through the mud. And then I've been asked, well, what do you think about this? And I said, well, they're my friend. I might not like it, but they're my friend. And we just got to be careful.
I think that
our stand for righteousness can't be backed by hate. That's not righteousness.
or
Right.
political correctness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if there needs to be a separation, and many times that happens, but don't let it be my decision or your decision that necessitates a separation, because sin separates.
Yeah.
And just as sin separates families, and sin separates a marriage, and sin will separate someone from a job.
Yeah.
Because if you do enough wrong, the job is going to expel you.
Yep.
And in a marriage, if there's someone insisting on great sin, it's not sustainable. So sin does the separating. So woe be unto us if we decide that when we see someone leaning a wrong direction, we go ahead and we pronounce Ichabod over their life and over that relationship long before they cross certain lines. I want to love them as long as we can. And if there's going to be a separation, let their own decisions, let their own sins be the separating force.
Right.
Because sin will separate, and they will remove themselves from you. You won't have to be in a position of choosing them, because they will unchoose you.
Yeah, but I also think we need to remember that the scripture says sin separates us from God.
Absolutely.
Someone else's sin shouldn't. I mentioned this last night, and I know this is a very fine line, and this can be controversial, and so I'm not trying to be controversial here. But I said this last night in my Bible study here at Conroe Church. I was talking about relationships, and I picked on Cameron and Katie because they just, last night was their first service back from their honeymoon, and I said, Cameron's going to hurt you. Katie's going to hurt you. And then I moved it away. And sometimes when people hurt us, we don't need to distance ourselves from them. Or when people make mistakes, or when people make decisions that we disagree with, or their decision hurt us desperately, sometimes we don't need to step back. Sometimes those people need us more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, we experienced this in our personal tragedy years ago. Like, we were amazed at the people who didn't run to us, but we were equally amazed at the people who did run to us.
Absolutely.
And I think when it comes to cancel culture and woke mentality that sometimes the church can adapt and not even realize, we are the hands and feet of Jesus.
Yeah.
And I want to deal gently with his people, regardless. It's not, we're circling back now to the very beginning of the episode, but it's not for us to determine motives because we never will be able to.
Imagine the scandal when Jesus is sitting at a table and the community harlot comes into the room, kneels at his feet, and starts crying on his feet,
Yeah.
and then takes down her hair, which is, I would think, when you let your hair down, it's a statement that we say, but that's a mark of some sort of intimacy. When you let your guard down, you let your hair down, and she literally began to. The men of the community, they knew who she was, and they were amazed at Jesus' response. I think that we should endeavor to amaze both the community and those that might not be worthy of our mercies with kindness and love, and not have to mark them off, because if they need to be marked off, it's gonna happen on its own. You don't have to do that. I don't have to do that. God will do that, because God does those things because sin separates. So this has been good.
Yes.
Sister Shirley, do you have anything on that list, or have we reached the end of your list?
Yeah, just basically, like, wrapping it up, that one thing I had written down was, don't let yourself have to be brought to the place where you need to be shown the mercy before you extend that mercy to others.
That's good.
Which we've said in multiple ways, multiple times.
That's good. Awesome.
No, but I like that.
Good job, Sister Kayla. It was a fine message last night. Fine message.
Hey, we got a lot of feedback, or I received several text messages last week after an episode. One guy texted me a picture of socks, like compression socks, because I said my feet were cold. So it's always greatly appreciated. My
To
buddy
those
sent
that
me
are listening to us every week, or watching us, or joining us, you make our life a lot better.
Yep.
Do us a favor. You're going on this journey with us. Why don't you bring somebody along with you and help us? We want our footprint to expand, but also we're looking for ways to touch and love and share love, and to share ourselves. And if we're able to be a blessing to anyone, we don't look at that arrogantly. We look at that with quiet confidence that we want to do that. At the same time, we need you, and we need your friend. So tell him